We've heard a lot about the shutdown of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. It's part of Elon Musk's and President Trump's cost-cutting efforts. USAID was on the front lines of America's foreign aid, especially in the areas of food assistance, disaster relief, and health. But its domestic offices are now closed, and most of its programs in 100 countries around the world are no longer supported. USAID managed more than $40 billion, far less than 1% of the U.S. budget, with more than 10,000 employees, mostly overseas, about 1,400 in Washington, D.C. Former U.S. Ambassador Niels Marquardt has a stake in what's happening with USAID. A Lewis and Clark College graduate, he's now diplomat in residence at Lewis and Clark. Marquardt was ambassador to several African nations, including Cameroon and Madagascar, and before that, he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Zaire and Rwanda. His final posting was U.S. Consul General in Sydney, Australia. Ambassador Marquardt, welcome to Eye on Northwest Politics.
Great to be with you, Ken.
What does a diplomat in residence do?
Well, mostly I spend my time talking to students about possibilities for careers overseas after graduation. I always mention the Peace Corps as a great jumping off point to sort of see if that lifestyle suits one. And then obviously I plug becoming a Foreign Service officer, as I did 40 some years ago. And but also talk about business opportunities, working abroad, working for NGOs, many of which are USAID contractors, and also teaching abroad. There's thousands of jobs around the country, around the planet really, teaching in American and international schools. So any of those possibilities are something that our students should be aware of, I think.
USAID, let's talk about that. What's your reaction to the USAID shutdown?
Well, USAID seems to be a little-known agency of the U.S. government to most Americans, but to me, having lived in many countries where we actually supervised, for example, in Madagascar, a very extensive USAID program, I'm very aware of the good that it does. I'm very proud of the work that USAID workers do, and it's been, I think, on several levels, it's been very disturbing to see it just decimated almost overnight. For one thing, the people who do this are real American heroes. You know, they're going to the ends of the earth, they're leaving their families behind, and they're doing it only because they believe in doing good. And then the impact, the most important and most devastating aspect of this is the impact that it's having on lives and livelihoods around the world. A lot of people are going to die because of this. The focus of many USAID programs is global health. So what does that mean concretely? It means, for example, providing drugs to 25 million people in Africa who have HIV/AIDS, and if those drugs are discontinued, many of them will die. Children will be born with HIV/AIDS that could be that otherwise wouldn't be born with the disease. These sorts of impacts are quite disturbing.
And you say that Oregon farmers are affected by this. Explain that.
Yeah, it's again a little-known fact, but we have a program called Food for Peace, Public Law 480, whereby we buy up, the U.S. government buys up surplus agricultural commodities like wheat and cooking oil, rice, and those are put in big bags, 200-pound bags, and sent around the world. Where, for example, when I was in the Congo, we had a $2 million program there where American agricultural produce was sent to the country and then sold on the market, and then the proceeds from that sale went to funding development programs in the country. This is very common, and so I think in Oregon we have 8 major wheat producers who are major vendors to USAID, and the cutoff means that they've lost their market. I don't know if they'll find another one, but it's a real blow.
USAID was created by President Kennedy in 1961 to expand foreign aid and project what's known as soft power around the world. What happens to the geopolitical landscape with this change in the perception of foreign aid?
Yeah, the soft power arrow in the quiver of the United States, and particularly, ambassadors are using this around the world as a way to get access to leaders. I mean, what you want to do as a U.S. ambassador, you want to have the ear of the leader of the country to which you've been assigned. And I have to say that one of the most effective ways of doing that is, for example, to spend an afternoon taking a president of a foreign country to visit an AID program and have that opportunity to have several hours of conversation, and for them to be personally aware of the good that the United States is doing in their country, building schools and particularly providing for the public health, eradicating malaria in places like Madagascar. These are important things that foreign leaders really appreciate, and it opens the door.
The administration says there's waste, fraud, and questionable spending by USAID. Here's some of the things mentioned by detractors and in social media. This list was compiled by Newsweek. They mainly deal with DEI and transgender issues. 1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbian workplaces, $70,000 for a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. These are small numbers compared to the big numbers that USAID deals with overall. But the question is, should U.S. taxpayers pay for any of these types of things?
Well, we've just had a change of administration. If the new administration doesn't want to do that anymore, they have absolute authority to discontinue any program that they don't think is, worth spending taxpayer money on. So that is what one would normally expect with a new administration. But to actually, those numbers were actually quite small compared to the $40 billion, which is the annual spending on foreign aid. So you can find examples, I think, if you go through, and that's what they've done. They've gone through and they found very small examples of things that outrage many Americans. But go ahead and discontinue them. All those things that you just mentioned, I never saw anything like that in any country where I served as a diplomat or as ambassador. So I think they're really kind of very unusual examples.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine has been the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid. Put that in context, especially with what we saw between President Trump and President Zelensky.
Yeah, I think what's happening with Ukraine right now is quite troubling. Most of the aid that has been going to Ukraine for the last 3 years since Russia invaded that country has military assistance, and that military assistance is basically munitions and weaponry that is manufactured in the United States. So the money actually doesn't go to Ukraine. The money goes to the American producers of these items, and then the weapons and the ammunition are sent to Ukraine, and they're used to defend the country from the Russian aggression. So that's not it's not that we're sending checks to Ukraine for the most part. I'm sure there's some development assistance and some humanitarian assistance. I'm sure there's some food aid, but mostly it's weaponry.
Ambassador Marquardt, thank you very much for being on Eye on Northwest Politics.
Oh, my pleasure.